welcome, welcome, welcome. It is 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I am sitting here wearing my lovely Ho Chi Minh t-shirt. You see that? Ho Chi Minh t-shirt. And I am talking to you shortly before midnight. I told you all on Twitter that it would be a late night chat. It is late at night, but I am here and I will be talking to you for a little bit. I figured I might as well have a conversation with all of you. It becomes more and more and more important for us to get on here and engage with each other as the world seems to be going completely crazy. I'm sitting here happy to engage with you. So much that we can talk about. It won't be a big, long speech tonight like it was last night. It'll be more of just a conversation, just a few thoughts that are on my mind. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I know a lot of you are here because you got notifications. A lot of you have also been complaining about not getting notifications. So be sure to hit the notifications bell. Post this on Reddit, Facebook, etc. Make this a bigger conversation. The more people here, the more the merrier, the more fun we have. The way this works, I give my opening remarks, then I do the roll call. After the roll call, from there, I answer your super chat questions, and then we're done. Now, a couple business announcements before we get started. There's a lot of anticipation of some events happening this weekend. Event number one that will be happening this weekend is tomorrow at noon. I will be streaming with Ramiro of Anticonquista. Ramiro is a longtime friend of mine. He's got a great YouTube channel, Anticonquista. So I will be streaming with him tomorrow at noon Eastern Standard Time. So that'll be good. So tune in for that. Also, on Sunday, I will be appearing on the George Galloway Show with George Galloway. So be sure to tune in. George Galloway is an amazing figure in Britain. I don't even know where to begin. Former member of Parliament, anti-imperialist, so many amazing things. He's just a totally amazing person. So I'll be streaming with, I'll be on the George Galloway Show. And then after that, later in the afternoon, I will be streaming with the new YouTube sensation known as Infrared. So if you are an Infrared fan, be sure to tune in and watch me streaming with Infrared. So yes, it's going to be quite a packed weekend. I will be quite busy. I hope I get a chance to sleep and get to the gym and eat this weekend because I will be doing so many things. But yes, it's going to be quite a packed weekend. So those are business announcements. Ramiro, George Galloway, Infrared. Wow, I can't think of a better group. I mean, that's a great group of people. I would like to have a show with all three of them. Wouldn't that be great? I could get all three of them together. George Galloway, Ramiro, and Infrared. That would be an exciting show. Unfortunately, I'm doing them all separately, but all of them will be joined by me this weekend. So that's going to be good. Be sure to tune in for that. A lot of fun happening. We're going to have one of our Zoom calls for the Center for Political Innovation. That'll be good. So it'll be great. It's going to be great. I'm very, very excited. So be absolutely sure to tune in this weekend. Now, as far as opening remarks for tonight, few updates. Bernie Sanders proposed a $15 minimum wage. And even though the majority of the U.S. favors it, it was completely shut down, not by the Republicans, but by the Democrats. They sunk it. They may have the majority in the U.S. Senate and the majority in the House of Representatives, but they don't want to hear $15 minimum wage. They are too busy fighting with the Republicans about Dr. Seuss. Very good point, David Fox. International Women's Day coming up on the 8th. I'm writing it down. They are too busy fighting with the Republicans about Dr. Seuss. That is the big thing. I do not like them in a house. I do not like them with a mouse. I do not like them, Sam I am. That is what Congress is fighting about. It's quite amusing. Alrighty. All right. Gus Hall talking to candidates. Alrighty. So, on that basis, it's worth noting that the United States is escalating its military presence in the Pacific, encircling China. China has been forced to increase its military spending because the United States is, escalating its military presence there. It seems that even though the administrations have changed, Antony Blinken, the new Secretary of State for the Biden administration, has agreed with Donald Trump that the focus of U.S. foreign policy is going to be China. Antony Blinken declared that China was the only country in the world capable of challenging the open international system. The open international system. That's an Anne Marie Slaughter, George Soros Open Society Institute phrase. And it's a phrase that basically means what the United States wants, the domination of the world by American corporations and American banks and the U.S. military and the Pentagon, that is the de facto system. If the United States is in charge, it's open. And if other people start to impede on U.S. dominance, then suddenly it's no longer open, right? It's no longer open. If the Western corporations can meddle in your country, it's an open society. If, however, a government comes in and starts impeding the power of Western corporations and starts fighting for its people, then suddenly that's democratic regression. This is how it works, right? The world is de facto supposed to be in the hands of the people who currently rule it. And if you start meddling with that, if you start changing that, then you're being a dictator. You're not advocating an open international system, blah, 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 blah. This is the code words that are being used by those who dominate our world. So, as you all know, today is March 5th here in the United States. The day before today was March 4th. And as you all know, that was the day that the QAnon apocalypse was supposed to happen. Do you remember this? The military and the police were on high alert. Congress even canceled one of their meetings. It was this big, amazingly huge deal that, oh my gosh, the QAnon people are going to go crazy and they're going to tear down government buildings and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And we got to be very, very afraid, and we got to have the police and the military out on patrol because, oh my God, the QAnons are going to come, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. Nothing. Nothing. And the whole thing, and it was a big embarrassment for the QAnon folks that nothing happened. The QAnon people had been predicting, they'd been saying that the inauguration of Joe Biden was a false flag, and that the military was going to install Donald Trump as the president on March 4th, because March 4th was the original inauguration day. All right, what's next here? Marriage and the family abolished under socialism. Okay, what's the other? What else do we got here? China's Belt and Road Initiative. Belt and Road Drug Cartel Crisis. You guys have got some interesting questions tonight, but that's okay. You give me a super chat, I will give you an answer. It is not always the answer that you want, but I will give you an answer. So, nothing happened. The QAnon people were predicting that, they said that the inauguration of Joe Biden was a false flag. It wasn't real because the military uniforms of the soldiers somehow were fake or something, and so therefore the military was going to inaugurate Donald Trump on March 4th. That did not happen. So the QAnoners should all be deeply embarrassed. However, the Democrats were predicting on March 4th there would be all kinds of crazy terrorist extremism and violence and chaos from the QAnoners. That also did not happen. And so we all got faked out, and there was nothing. And this kind of gets back to a point that I have been making. I've made this point many times before. Trotsky. I've made this point many times before. Many times. That the two main threats to America's working families are, on the one hand, free market libertarian economics, and on the other hand, pro-imperialist, pessimistic, destructive pseudo-leftism. And both of these things function as a kind of 1-2 punch from the big bankers and monopolists who dominate the United States. This is how they are able to beat down America's working families. Libertarian economics, free marketeers, cut government spending, and it's embarrassing. You look at the United States now, they are unpaving the roads across the country. Right? Many municipalities around the country cannot maintain paved roads. Texas, they haven't been investing in their electrical infrastructure, and they've been cutting back on public utilities. And look at Texas, the power went out. Across the country, water isn't being properly purified. The Flint water crisis was the most blatant example of that, but in many parts of the country, things are below decent standards. Water's not being properly purified. Roads are falling apart. The railway is falling apart. It's embarrassing. Washington, D.C., they had to actually close down the public transportation a couple times in 2016. Someone even died when there was a fire caused in the public transportation system in D.C., and the smoke filled up a car and someone died, a car of the metro in D.C. I mean, it's embarrassing. Look at the New York City subway system. It's completely embarrassing. The country's falling apart. But libertarians think that's great, right? The government shouldn't be involved in the economy. Milton Friedman, Friedrich von Hayek, Alan Greenspan, Ludwig von Mises economics. The idea that if you just privatize things, you just cut back government spending, everything will be all right, is a big, dangerous lie. It is widely promoted across the United States, and it is essentially a vehicle for warfare. It is a vehicle for cutting social programs, for laying off government workers, for destabilizing the country, for increasing poverty and suffering. And it's based on lies. It's based on a huge amount of lies, right? Nowhere in the world have libertarian economic policies ever been successful. Why? Folks, if you have 4 apples and you take away 2 apples, you're left with 2 apples. And 2 apples is generally less than 4 apples. You do not increase by subtraction. That's just something that doesn't go on. I was never very good at math, as some of the people in the chat who are more familiar with me will know. I was never very good at math, but I do know that if you subtract, you don't get more. Libertarian economics is based on the fallacy that you can cut your way into economic growth. You can cut your way into economic growth. In Chile, Pinochet came into office. Freud and Frankenstein. Okay. Pinochet came into office, cut all kinds of government spending, cut off nutritional supplements to low-income families and food subsidies, cut off government jobs, and deregulated the economy. And the result was the Chilean economy being demolished. The so-called Chilean economic miracle that libertarians like to tout did not happen until a decade later, after the Pinochet government had dropped its economic policies and started renationalizing things. The Milton Friedman Pinochet economic experiment was a disaster. After the fall of the Soviet Union, in country after country after country, they implemented libertarian economic reforms, privatizing government resources, cutting off government programs and subsidies, etc. And the result was mass unemployment, mass poverty, and it was a disaster. In Bolivia, Jeffrey Sachs implemented free market shock therapy economics, and it destroyed Bolivia. In Venezuela in the 90s, there were riots. The Caracazo was an explosion in response to drastic increases in the cost of public transportation and other neoliberal economic reforms. People talked about how the electricity wouldn't come on for weeks in certain neighborhoods. It was a disaster. Everywhere free market libertarian policies have been enacted, it has been a disaster. Libertarian economics don't work. And yet they're widely believed. And there are all kinds of people in the United States who understand that there is a group of rich people who have all the power, who understand that our freedoms are being taken away, who understand that average people are getting poorer while a small elite gets richer, and they say, we need real capitalism. It's a nightmare. It is a huge nightmare. We just need real capitalism. If we just privatize everything and abolish food stamps and deregulate and get rid of the minimum wage, everything will be fine. This is a disaster. And it is, if you're a responsible leftist, you absolutely positively need to combat libertarian economics, because it is a destructive force. That's the first threat. The second threat is pseudo-leftism. Folks, socialism, Marxism has always been about building. It has been about constructing. It has been about raising people to higher levels of development. If you look at China before 1949, it was a dirt poor country. Since the communists have been in charge, China became a superpower. Look at Russia before 1917. Look at Russia now, superpower. Since the communists came in, they've made it a superpower. Communists build power plants. Communists build schools. Communists build hospitals. Communists wipe out illiteracy. Communists wipe out unemployment. Communists raise people up out of poverty. In Nicaragua, the Sandinistas are doing amazing things, eliminating poverty, building people up, building hospitals, building railways, building highways. If you look at what's gone on, the largest electrical power plant in the Middle East, the Aswan Dam of Egypt, was built by Abdel Nasser, the Arab socialist leader, in coordination with the Soviet Union. The greatest irrigation system, the largest irrigation system in the world, the great man-made river, was constructed by Muammar Gaddafi, the Islamic socialist of Libya. Need I go on? Sure, I'll go on. The largest elevated road in the world, the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway, was built by Mao Zedong. The space program was invented by the Soviet Union. They are the first people to get to outer space. The largest power plant in the world, the Three Gorges Dam, was constructed by the Chinese Communist Party. Huawei Technologies, the world's largest telecommunications manufacturer, is a profit-sharing cooperative set up by the Chinese Communist Party and facilitated by the state centrally planned economy of China, and specifically the Chinese military. Socialism is about building. It is about constructing. It is about taking people who have been downtrodden and raising them up. And starting, yes, with the most oppressed, raising people up, constructing, and building. Socialism is a positive, constructive ideology. However, there is a current that dominates discourse in the United States that is not about building. It is not about constructing. It's not about taking things that are impoverished and building them up. It's not about building a better world. It's about tearing things down. The synthetic left, the group of people for whom leftism simply means that they think all Republicans are Nazis and are militantly in favor of transgender rights and cuss people out on the internet over minute disagreements over the transgender question. The destructive cancel culture current that is very well alive in the United States. The group of people that go around tearing things down, that think there are too many people in the world and we need to reduce the human population, that openly say things like human beings are a cancer on Mother Earth, that openly call for rolling back industrialization and going back to pre-industrial civilization. A group of people that think average Americans don't deserve a better life, but that they're a bunch of pigs and labor aristocrats who need to be beaten down and driven further into poverty to make up for their, punish them for their white privilege. This destructive current, the synthetic left, this element that openly wants to make life worse for average Americans, that openly opposes human progress, this element is also a threat. Just as the libertarians go around trying to tear down the United States in terms of economics, and the synthetic left go around trying to tear down the United States ideologically, to lay the ideological basis for trying to roll back the wheels of history, trying to impose pessimism, trying to impose a destructive and suicidal mindset on the country. And if you look at the internet, all the toxicity coming out of BreadTube, all the toxicity coming out of social media, all the hate, all the cancel culture, all of this, it walks hand in hand. This is a 1-2 punch from the bosses. They punch us once in the face with libertarianism. They punch us another time in the face with synthetic leftism. And as a result, the working class of the world beats down. And what do both of these currents have in common? They are both pro-imperialist. Now, there are some exceptions within both camps, right? There are some of these synthetic leftists that will, grudgingly oppose interventions. There are some of these libertarians that are deeply confused and somehow are able to be non-interventionist amid their libertarianism. But your average libertarian wants the United States to invade Venezuela and overthrow the government because everyone knows communism is evil and we need real capitalism. And your average synthetic leftist wants the United States to invade Venezuela and tear down the socialist government because Maduro is homophobic and transphobic. And I read on the internet that he's not a real socialist because real socialism just means worker cooperatives and there's like a government there and they do business with like evil Russia and China, and it's the same thing. It is the exact same current. These two pro-imperialist currents that both want to destroy the lives of America's working families. These two currents must be ideologically combated. If we are going to make any progress in this country, we need to refute the lies of libertarian economics, and we need to refute the lies of synthetic leftism. And I must say that that most of the groups, if not all of the groups, calling themselves communist in the United States have dropped the ball on this issue. And I've been watching this, and thank goodness I'm on my own. Thank goodness I'm building the Center for Political Innovation, because I, for years, watched these two currents develop within the U.S. population, and I watched the communist groups do nothing to combat it. When it came to the libertarians, they ignored them. I said, look, there's all these people who are waking up and realizing that the government is wrong, realizing that the wars are wrong, and say we need real capitalism. We need to go to these people. We need to refute their arguments. We need to dissect the lies of Milton Friedman and Friedrich von Hayek. And these people said, oh, no, just build the movement, Oh, on the one hand. So they ignored, and now they're just canceling. Now you're not allowed to speak to a libertarian. Choosing what to do in life. Now you're not allowed to speak to them. Jimmy Dore is being canceled because he spoke to one of them, right? So you're not allowed to even speak to them. So now, first you were just supposed to totally ignore them. Now you're supposed to just cancel them and shame them. You're not even allowed, you're not allowed to refute their bull-honky, nutball economic theories, right, that have failed everywhere. You're not allowed to do that, on the one hand. Meanwhile, when it came to the synthetic left, and the cancel culture, and the anti-class struggle rhetoric, and the pro-imperialist rhetoric, the response of the communist groups in the United States was to tail after it. And I have saw it over and over and over again. The whole, the socialist and communist groups just tailed after it. They did not stand up against identity politics. They did not stand up against socialism just means me and my friends start a pencil factory and we share the profits from the pencil factory. And they don't do that. They go along with each other. And the communist groups, so they tailed after the synthetic left, not realizing that the synthetic left is a negation of everything that Marxism, Leninism, and socialism stands for. And they then did not engage in any ideological combat and any effort to ideologically refute libertarianism. So they basically let these folks take over. And one thing that I will say about these two currents, One is very prevalent among Republicans, Trump supporters. The other is very prevalent among Democrats and liberals. But they actually like each other. Watch Jacobin and Reason Foundation debate each other. Actually, don't. I'll sum up what happens. You can go watch it if you want, but it's painful. Reason Foundation, a bunch of libertarians, get up there and lie and tell the lie, socialism's never anywhere, and it's like, really? All the space program, raising millions of people out of poverty, turning Russia and China into superpower. No, never happened. Socialism's never worked anywhere. It's awful. Socialism is evil. They do that. Reason Foundation, libertarians, austerity, people who want to take food stamps away from low-income people. They repeat that, and that's why, and that's the justification, right? You can't have a conversation about the minimum wage without talking about Stalin in the United States, right? It always comes up. If you ever call for any progressive economic reforms, inevitably Pol Pot and Stalin and Mao get brought in, and this lie that communism never worked anywhere ends up in the conversation. It's central to the libertarian, the libertarian ideology. So Reason Foundation will get up there and just do this anti-communist song and dance, right? Economic liberty, privatize everything. So you get that. And then, what do you get from Jacobin? Do the Jacobin people ever get up and refute that? No. Are you kidding me? Do the Jacobin people ever get up and ideologically challenge that? No. What they do is they get up and they agree. And they say, we agree. We're against state socialism. We agree with you. We are totally against state socialism. You're every lie you just told, where you said that socialism has never had an economic success, and it clearly has, that's true. We embrace it, and we're socialists. And look, if even socialists like us believe it, it clearly must be true. And that's not what Marx wanted. Marx wasn't a statist. Marx just believed that workers should freely, without any state coercion, get together and open profit-sharing enterprises. And the libertarians then respond and say, well, gee, if you want to open a profit-sharing enterprise, we don't want the government to be able to stop you. And then the Jacobin socialists go, oh, that's great! And they just hug each other, and it's this love fest. We all want to starve America's working families. We all want America to be poorer. Yeah, we all don't want any state to get involved and protect America's working families. We don't want a government of action to fight the corporations. Oh, we all just want to weaken state power and let the big monopolies and the big corporations roll over America's working families. We all want to invade Venezuela. We all want to tear down China and Russia. We all want to start World War III to free the world for the giant free market system. Libertarians and fake leftists are a match made in heaven, and they serve the same people, the same international oligarchy of big bankers and monopolists. And on the one side, they use the synthetic left to tear down any notion of collectivism, any notion of cooperation between people, any sense of group identity, to unleash people's impulses, to drive people into an antisocial and destructive frenzy. That's the role of the synthetic left. And they use the libertarians to deregulate and open up the international markets to big corporations, tear down the living standards of people, break labor unions, privatize. It is exactly, they walk hand in hand. Synthetic, anarcho-pessimistic, suicide leftism and libertarian psychopathy, they are two sides of the same coin. They are two sides of the same coin. The synthetic left are very similar to the Stoicists of ancient Rome. The Stoicists of ancient Rome. And the libertarians are very similar to the hedonists of ancient Rome. There were two trends among Romans, hedonists and Stoicists, purpose or calling in life. Right? Among the Romans, the hedonists were those who were selfish and lived only for their own pleasure, right? The cult of Dionysus or Bacchus, right? The orgies and the drunken parties. One practice among Romans is they would stuff themselves full of food. In fact, the Emperor Claudius was known to stuff himself full of food, and then he had a servant with a big long feather whose job it was to shove that feather right down his throat so he could vomit up all that food and then stuff his face some more. That was the Emperor Claudius, right? And the gladiatorial shows and the chariot races and the bread and circuses culture. That was the hedonists. The hedonists who lived simply for pleasure, were indifferent to the suffering of others, took sadistic glee in watching other people be tortured, right? Had no sense of morality. That's the libertarians, right? Ayn Rand, right? Compassion and altruism are weakness. Be the virtue of selfishness. That's what libertarianism is. Meanwhile, the stoicists, right? They are the ones that say, oh, we need more meaning in life. We're going to whip ourselves and flog ourselves. Oh, we are going to use drugs. Oh, we are going to live in poverty because it's beautiful, because then we can be more in touch with our spiritual side. And the libertarian hedonists and the stoicist synthetic leftists, they are two sides of a decaying empire. And what both of them share is a focus on the self. The hedonist, the libertarian, is concerned with his own pleasure. He is insisting that nobody try to make him empathize with anyone else or think about anyone else's feelings. He has no compassion or kindness. That's the libertarian. The synthetic leftist, on the other hand, is so concerned about his inner intellectual, and he's trying to find truth, and he's engaged in this deep intellectual journey, and no one can tell him how to think, and he's gonna be isolated, and he's gonna engage in this weird mystical thing to find truth all on his own. It's all about self. It's all about self. And these are the two ideologies that destroyed the Roman Empire. Hedonism and Stoicism, and synthetic leftism and libertarianism are the two ideologies that are destroying the United States of America. And they work hand in hand. They work hand in hand to destroy the country. But communists and Marxists have always represented something different. Neither hedonism nor Stoicism, but we are city builders. The city-building tendency of human history. Marxism stands for historical progress. It stands for marching ahead and building and constructing. It stands for seeking to build a whole new world. That is what Marxism represents. It represents a way forward, not a way backward. It represents raising up people's conditions. It represents the proletarians, the working class coming together, standing arm in arm, and rebuilding the world to eradicate injustice and poverty and scarcity and inequality, and marching toward a stateless, classless world of vast abundance and human progress. Marxism is the city-building tendency. It is the tradition of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. It is the tradition of Socrates. It is the tradition of so many great individuals throughout history who have pushed forward human progress, driven by an inner flame of creativity. This is what Marxism is. And I tweeted out today, as Karl Kautsky said, that Christianity in ancient Rome was largely a representation of the proletariat. Rome was the first society in all of human history where you ever had proletarians. In ancient Rome, you had a lot of slaves, and you had a lot of landowners. Patricians and plebeians were landowners. But in addition to the patricians and plebeians who owned the land, and the many slaves who were considered to be their property, you had craftsmen, pipe fitters, carpenters, masons, bricklayers. And it was among the proletarians of Rome, those who did not own anything, but also were not owned by anyone else, that you had a lot of new social problems that had never existed before. Rome, because it was the first society to have proletarians, became the first society in history to have unemployment. Never before had there been a society with unemployment. But when Rome had proletarians, Greeks and Jews and others who had come to Rome to work as craftsmen mainly, they suddenly had unemployment. Rome was the first society in history to have homelessness. Why? Because the proletarians did not own any property. So if they could not afford to rent where they lived, they became homeless. And so in Rome, the most advanced city, the center of an empire, you had homeless people. You had unemployed people. Never before. Never before had you had this in history. And as the proletarians became hungry and homeless, they began worshiping a prophet from Palestine who was a carpenter, a craftsman, and who preached about kindness and compassion. And early Christianity in Rome taught that the proletarians would rise up, and that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. The book of Revelations was largely interpreted as a call for an insurrection by the proletariat against the Roman Empire, against the Antichrist, the king of the whole world. And that Christianity was a grouping of proletarians in Rome who withheld their labor and went on strike, who built orphanages for the homeless children, who fed each other and engaged in charity. And this is the role that Christianity played. And at first, of course, the Roman Empire, Malcolm X, the Roman Empire was absolutely opposed to Christianity, right? They saw it as a reactionary sect that was trying to overthrow their empire, fed Christians to the lions, etc. But as Karl Kautsky points out in his book on the foundations of Christianity, after a while, the Roman emperors started to realize that as much as they did not like the Christians rallying the proletarians to fight for their rights and preaching their religion and doing what they did and organizing the proletariat, that in a way the Christians were starting to make Rome more stable. Andrew Cuomo, right? If you didn't have homeless children everywhere, that made Rome more stable. If you had, charity, and so that the people who were unemployed could eat, they could get some free food, it made Rome more stable. And Christianity suddenly began to polarize, because originally Christianity had been a revolutionary movement of the proletariat. But the Romans and the Roman emperors began to see that it could also be a mechanism for pacifying the proletariat, and that they could use the Christians to set up orphanages and to set up food giveaways and to teach an ideology of kindness. And it was a way to contain the proletarians by making the Roman Empire seem more humane and more compassionate. They could pacify the proletariat, and in order to do that, Christianity would have to change. It would no longer be a revolutionary doctrine, but instead be a reformist doctrine. And if you look at Christianity in Rome, it actually went through a very similar transformation process to social democracy in Europe. Marxism began as a revolutionary movement to overthrow capitalism. But as capitalism moved into its monopoly stage of imperialism, and as there were strata of workers in the homeland who started to get higher wages, the social democratic parties, German Social Democratic Party, the British Labour Party, the French Socialists, others, these parties started to play a role for the imperialists. by enacting things like a minimum wage and universal male suffrage and public education, they were helping to stabilize the very system that they were trying to overthrow. And much like there was the crisis of Marxism, where the revolutionary Marxists and the social democratic pro-imperialist reformist Marxists fought each other and combated each other and battled each other for the soul of their movement, you can see that within the early Christian church, as those who hold on to the doctrine that Christianity is a revolutionary ideology that will tear down the Roman Empire, and those who are gradually pacifying and watering down Christianity and making it a mechanism for stabilizing the Roman Empire. It's very fascinating. And ultimately, we know what happened. As Rome began to continuously decline and decline and decline, in words, Rome became more and more Christian. And eventually, you had the conversion of Constantine. And you had Rome at the point that it pretty much was on the brink of falling apart, adopting Christianity as its official religion. But the Christianity that Rome adopted as its official religion was quite different than what Christianity originated as the revolutionary movement of the proletariat. When Constantine adopted Christianity, he adopted a watered-down version of Christianity that was about making his empire seem more stable, more kind, and more humane. It's very fascinating. It's a very fascinating parallel. And that Christianity, as the movement of the proletariat for freedom, was eventually co-opted by the very empire it had originated in the struggle to destroy. And that is a very interesting parallel to what has happened to Marxism, right? The British Labour Party, the main imperialist party in Britain for many years. They're weak now, but at one point they were the dominant political party in Britain. They professed to be a party of socialism, right? Social democrats have run France and Germany and Italy and other imperialist countries for a long time. Much like the Emperor Constantine adopted a religion that had been started by people who wanted to overthrow his empire, the imperialists have adopted, in some cases, an ideology created by people who wanted to destroy their system. That this is how these things work. You can learn a lot from these historical parallels. You can learn a lot from it. Some people even look at the death of Julius Caesar. Right? It's going to come up. It's going to be March 15th, the Ides of March. Julius Caesar, who was stabbed to death on the Senate, betrayed one of his best friends, had the initials JC, aligned himself with the proletariat in Rome, was considered to be an ally of the proletariat, and legalized Judaism, so was mocked and called King of the Jews by his rivals. Some even see the death of Julius Caesar, who was betrayed by a friend and murdered on the floor of the Roman Senate, around the time of the spring equinox, March 15th. Some even see, perhaps some weird reinterpretation or imagery of Julius Caesar in the Christian story and in the Christian Gospels, as if maybe the death of Julius Caesar maybe influenced how the story of Jesus' persecution was eventually told. This is all very fascinating. Read Michael Parenti's very important book, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome. Read The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky, and you can see that there is important history here for all of us, right? And that often there are parallels in history. The United States is very much the new Roman Empire. It is holding back world history. It is a destructive force. Western imperialism dominates the world and is holding back human history, trying to keep the world poor so they can stay on top. And there are Parians who are suffering, and there are hedonists, and there are stoicists, and the empire is doomed as a reactionary force. And I have long maintained that we are indeed the city builders. We are the city builders. And I look at what China is doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, and I look at what Russia is doing with the Eurasian Economic Union, what's happening with Bolivarianism that's on the rise once again in Latin America, back in power in Bolivia, on the brink of taking power back in Ecuador, Nicaragua, Venezuela. I look at what's happening around the world as more and more people are realizing that socialism is the answer, and I'm learning from history. History is marching forward, right? Empires fall, but humanity continues to move ahead. And in our new day, it seems that imperialism is doomed, a system where a small group of bankers and billionaires dominate the global economy, keeping the world poor so that they can stay rich, telling us that there is no historical progress, telling us that their system is the end of history. It seems that a change, an explosion of revolutionary energy is coming. A constructive force will once again emerge. And what we need now more than ever is a government of action to fight for working families. In the United States, we need a government of action to fight for working families. I have said many times that if we wanted to change the United States, if a government that fought for working people were to come to power in Washington, D.C., it would take 4 dramatic steps. Step number 1 would be a massive reconstruction of the United States, building new highways, building new bridges, building new power plants and infrastructure, high-speed railway. There would be a mass program to completely rebuild this country. Instead of having soldiers overseas dying in wars for empire, we would start waging war on poverty and waging war on inequality in the United States. There would be a mass program to completely rebuild the country. Step 2, how are you going to pay for this, right? That's always the question. Public control of America's oil, and America's gas, and America's timber, and America's coal. All the profits made from the land of the United States of America should go to the people of the United States of America. No more states getting poorer while the natural gas beneath their feet, goes into the pockets of fracking companies. No more big corporations like ExxonMobil and BP and Chevron and Shell enriching themselves while the country gets poorer and poorer and poorer. The natural resources should be the public property of the country, and the profits from America's natural resources should go into the public budget so they can be used for that program of reconstruction of the country. Step number 3 would be state control of banking. The government should have a monopoly on the lending of money. The government should loan people money. The community should be loaning money. If somebody wants to start a business, somebody wants to buy a home, they should have to make a case not to a private banker that he can make profits on his loan, but instead that their project or their home or their credit card or whatever will benefit the community. And if it is determined to be in the interest of the community will provide the money. And when the loan is paid back, the interest will go into the public budget to once again pay for things. The state should have a monopoly on credit so that credit can be strategically assigned in the interests of the country, not in the interests of private bankers. That is step number 3. And step number 4 would be enacting an economic bill of rights. The right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, the right to health care, right? Roosevelt's economic bill of rights. And if you were to enact these four points, if you were to have a mass program of reconstruction of the country, if you were to nationalize and have public control of the natural resources of the country, if you were to centralize credit and the banking system in the hands of the state, if you were to enact an economic bill of rights, if you were to do those 4 things, the transition to socialism would not be very far off. A working-class government, in order to enact those 4 policies, would have to build a mass movement of working people that were organized and ready to fight those things. In order to carry those things out, the nature of the military, the nature of the intelligence agencies, the nature of the media and the press would all have to be changed. In order to carry out these things, there would need to be a dramatic shift in the nature of the government of the United States. We would need to have a government that no longer served the corporations, but actively fought against them, and all of the institutions of the state would have to be reformed and readjusted in order to accommodate that. You would need a new kind of state in order to carry out those 4 reforms, and while those 4 reforms in and of themselves are not socialism, That would pave the way toward creating socialism. What we need right now is not a weak government that sits back and lets the corporations do whatever they want. Not a government that sits back and says, oh, you don't got power in Texas. Oh boy, hope you can figure that one out. Gee golly. Not a government that sits back and says, oh wow, we got mass unemployment among young people. Well, you're on your own, kids. Hope you can get money from your parents. Figure it out. Not a government that sits back and says, wow, the roads are falling apart. Hope you don't have a car accident. But a government that swings into action, dramatic action, to address the needs of working families. Swift, dramatic action, mobilizing the public, mobilizing the working people to swing into action, to stand up to corporate elites, to rescue the country from the crisis. A government of action to fight for working families. That is what is needed in the United States. A government that fights for the people, not for the billionaires and the bankers. Right? That's what is needed. And obviously, such a government would be very friendly to the Belt and Road Initiative of China, very friendly to Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union, very friendly to Cuba and Venezuela, very friendly to countries around the world that have basically done the same thing and have a government that fights for them and is based among the people and stands up to big corporations. But at the end of the day, it would be important to point out that when socialism comes to the United States of America, it will not be Cuban socialism, Russian socialism, Chinese socialism, Vietnamese socialism, Norwegian socialism, Venezuelan socialism, Bolivarianism, Baathism, Maoism, Trotskyism, none of that. When socialism comes to the United States, it will be a uniquely American form of socialism. It will be a socialism rooted in the struggles of the United States and the contradictions of the United States that brought it into being. It will be a socialism meant to address the crisis of U.S. society. It will be a socialism with American characteristics, the type of socialism that works in China. They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And obviously it will have a different name, but you could call the socialism that will emerge in the United States socialism with American characteristics, because it will be a unique model to serve this country in our time and to address the contradictions of this society. William Z. Foster himself said that socialism, when it comes to the United States, will contain many uniquely American characteristics, and that is common sense. Stop LARPing. We're never going to have Juche in the United States. Never going to have Baathism or Maoism or Bolivarianism in the United States. We are going to have to figure out a political formula for mobilizing the American working class to fight for their rights, to stand arm in arm with the people around the world, to dismantle imperialism. I've said that many times. And yes, this will not simply be tweaking the United States and trying to make an imperialist system work better, and that won't work. Right? I've said for a long time that the United States is fruit of a poison tree. That's a legal term. That if a police officer searches your home with an illegal warrant or without a warrant, what he finds is not valid because it was acquired in an impure way. Right? In the Islamic tradition, they talk about haram. You steal food and you eat it, it might make you sick. If you take out a loan that violates the Islamic law in order to buy a house, that house may catch on fire. That if something is created in an impure way, it is tainted. It is cursed. And the problem that we have in the United States right now is that the United States of America is fruit of a poison tree. It is tainted. It is cursed. The United States was acquired with the genocide of Native Americans. It was acquired with the mass murder of Africans and the transatlantic slave trade, the Middle Passage. It was acquired with the brutal theft of Mexico from the Chicano people. It was acquired in the most impure and horrific way. The United States was founded on genocide and slavery and imperialism, and it is engaged in horrendous wars in Korea and Vietnam and elsewhere. And yes, at one point, sure, the empire provided a decent standard of living to at least the white working class of the United States. You had an aristocracy of labor, well-paid workers in the homeland, you know, the white picket fence, leave it to beaver, house and a car, 2.5 children. But at that time, and the United States was living in splendor coming out of the Second World War, all those houses, all those cars, all those TV sets and refrigerators and hula hoops were dripping with blood. It was the blood of the African American people who lived under Jim Crow. It was the blood of the people of Latin America who lived under brutal military juntas backed by the United States. The blood of the Korean people massacred. The blood of the Vietnamese people. It was all cursed. It was all tainted. And for the United States to move towards socialism, it will have to be a complete spiritual and economic and political rebirth. The curse must be lifted. A whole refoundation or renaissance or rebirth must take place in the United States. The country must be reestablished on new values: brotherhood, sisterhood, kindness, compassion, and solidarity. No more can we be a country of God, guns, and guts. No more can we be a country of white settler colonialism. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. No more. It will take a spiritual, economic, and political reawakening for the United States to come out of the current crisis. Imperialism must be dismantled, and a whole new country based on new values and new feelings of love, kindness, and compassion and solidarity must emerge. Right? That's basically the message of socialists. The earth must rise on new foundations. We have been naught, we shall be all. This has been the message of socialism for a long time. The libertarians hear it, and it makes them shit themselves in fear. Government of action. Oh my God, they might take my private property. The synthetic leftists hear it, and they say, oh my God, they're going to be mean to people. They're building a mass movement where people believe in truth and have order. Oh my God, my mom might make me clean my room. The libertarians are terrified of us. The synthetic leftists are terrified of us. But America's working families, the people losing their jobs and losing their homes right now, suffering without power, suffering without electricity, angry, wanting a government that will stand up for them against the rich, they're ready to hear this message. The working people of the United States are sick and tired of Wall Street bankers and billionaire monopolists leading their country into further chaos and decay. They're tired of the roads not being paved. They're tired of their wages going down. They're tired of people in their community being, afflicted with drug addiction. They're tired of seeing their children locked up in a military industrial complex. They are tired of a low-wage police state emerging and taking away the so-called freedom that this society has long cherished. Working families are angry. And they're tired of being alone and isolated in a pandemic. They're ready to join arm in arm with their neighbors, with their community, with their class brothers, their brothers of all nationalities and all races. They are ready to march forward. America's working families are ready to move ahead. Now the question is, will we, synthetic left, will we provide the message they're looking for? That's the question. And that concludes my opening remarks for tonight. So now I'll be doing that roll call. Names and locations, folks. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Phil from Miami, Florida. Welcome, Phil. Dan from Iran. Rafael in Brazil, Joey from Belize, United Corporations of America, Montreal, Chaya, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Robert from Hawaii, Billings, Montana, Shaw from Maryland, Gateshead, England, Northern California, West Palm Beach, JT24 in Mississippi, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, Nate from Chicago, Jay in Tennessee, Woodlands, Texas, St. Louis, Missouri. You just blew my mind with Caesar Christ comparisons. Well, there you go. Wisconsin, Harris, North Carolina, California, Northern California, West Palm Beach, Albany, New York, Miguel, Puerto Rico, Springfield, Missouri, McMindfulness in Washington State, West Palm Beach, Dylan from Georgia, Fred from Alameda, California, Pennsylvania, USA, from here to eternity, Space Coast, Auckland, New Zealand, California, West Palm Beach, Great Snowy Forest, Canada, Alan from South Korea, Tennessee, Saba from Iran, Northern California, Soledad, California, Anchorage, Alaska, Antoine from California, Ronning from Bellingham, Washington, Fairfax, Virginia, Jack, Nate, Juan from Mexico, David Fox, longtime friend of the program, out in Bendigo, Australia, Pennsylvania, USA, Knoxville, Tennessee, John in Houston, Jack Smith, B in Cleveland, George in Glendale, California, Helen Woolley loves the positive revolutionary. Love everything you have to say too, Helen. Great stuff. Solidarity from Northern Michigan. Robert Webb called me an amazing man. Well, thank you. I'm sure you're amazing as well, Robert. Kieran from San Diego. Matt in Baltimore. More. Croatia. Guerrilla Gang, rise up. I don't, is that an infrared thing? I think that's an infrared thing. That's okay. Very good. Tennessee is the future powerhouse of the South. Very good. Very good. All righty. What else is new, folks? Anyone else with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? Florida, Harold Sullivan. Very good. Glad you're with us tonight. Glad you are with us. Very good. Anyone else? Anyone else here? Calgary. All right. I don't know where that is, but that's good. Southern California. Boston, Max. Canada. Bulgaria, Peekskill, New York, site of the very famous incident, the Peekskill riot. Very interesting. Anchorage, Alaska. Daniel from Seattle. Welcome, Daniel. Jonathan from Jersey. Welcome, Jonathan. Uruguay, Seattle. Very good. Quite a crowd we've got here tonight. Welcome. Glasgow, Scotland. Liberate, California. Very good. Very good. Folks, be sure to tweet this out. Be sure to make this a bigger conversation. Be sure to post this on Facebook and on all the different social media apps. The more people hear, the merrier. I know it's a late night conversation, but the more people hear, the more fun we have. Florida Communist Party Club is pretty big. All right. Very good. All right. So now I will answer your super chat questions. Keep them rolling in. I will give you an answer to your super chat questions. All right, question number 1, International Women's Day. That's coming up. That is March 8th, and that is a long-time socialist holiday. It was started by the Second International, the Socialist International, and it was created in commemoration of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire here in New York City. What is it? Why? Antifa... FBI informants. All right. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, a horrendous event where there were working class women who were working in a sweatshop and they were locked in. It's near what is now Washington Square Park in New York City. They were locked in and burned alive in a horrendous fire in New York City. And it was a big source of outrage. These working class women were burned alive. Please educate me about Alexander's greatness. All right. Please, more of these opening kinds of statements. Thank you, Frank. It was a horrendous event, working women. It was actually originally International Working Women's Day, and it's now been incorporated by the UN and such, but it was a Marxist socialist holiday, March 8th coming up, and I'm sure there are many important commemorations going on to commemorate International Women's Day. The two communist holidays are May 1st, International Workers' Day, and March 8th, International Working Women's Day. So thank you for pointing that out, David Fox. Very important point. All right. Someone asked about Gus Hall talking to presidential candidates. My understanding is that it is widely known, and I have looked for a print source on this because I have heard this from many people, and I want to find a print reference to this. My understanding is that Walter Mondale did contact Gus Hall and contacted him in regards to what the Soviet Union might do in the lead up to the election that happened in 1984, and that Gus Hall considered it a really big achievement that he was in contact with Walter Mondale's campaign. That has been widely told to me. I've heard that anecdote from many people that were in the Communist Party at that time. And I think it's probably if you get some of it's in probably Gus Hall's report from that year. That was the last presidential election campaign that the Communist Party had. They have not run their own presidential candidate since then. But 1984, Gus Hall and Angela Davis ran for president. Walter Mondale was running against Reagan. The Communist Party, even though they ran their own candidate, they made a point of saying that the essence of their campaign was to defeat Ronald Reagan. You can actually watch, there's a great video from that campaign online on YouTube. You can watch of the Gus Hall, Angela Davis campaign. They even had a campaign song, "People Before Profits." And you get a bio of Angela Davis, bio of Gus Hall, and you kind of see the Communist Party's viewpoint in 1984. They talk a lot about the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. They talk a lot about the Soviet Union and the arms race. Yeah, it's worth checking out. But yeah, my understanding is that Walter Mondale and Gus Hall had a phone call during that presidential campaign. And Gus Hall considered that to be a very big achievement, showing that the Communist Party was influential in the movement to defeat the ultra-right. And that many people in the Communist Party or around the Communist Party disagreed with Gus Hall and felt that if anything, it showed the Communist Party was being a little bit too subservient to the Democrats. But yeah, that's kind of lore. I've heard it from multiple people, and I've looked very hard to find a print source on that. Now, obviously, Walter Mondale is long gone. 1984 election was a long time ago. But obviously, that might have been the kind of thing the Communist Party would not have printed because that would have been scandalous, right? There's this whole thing now about Russian meddling or whatever, and Gus Hall was the leader of the U.S. Communist Party, which was aligned with the Soviet Union. He appeared on Soviet television very frequently. Gus Hall was a figure who was associated with the Soviet Union. So it would have been a scandal. Communism is a dirty word and was definitely a dirty word in the United States in the 80s. So it would have been a scandal. And I've seen that written about. I've heard that many times. But, I'd like to confirm the accuracy of it by finding it in print somewhere. So if you know anywhere, if someone viewing this knows about this phone call between Walter Mondale and Gus Hall, if you could please forward me a source where that's written down, I would like to cite it in written article, etc. Anti-monopoly government leads to socialism. Why did Howard Taft's presidency not lead to socialism? Taft broke up monopolies. All right. Howard Taft breaking monopolies. Not lead to socialism. Wrote it down. All right. Keep the super chats coming. I'm happy to answer them. All right. What about marriage and the family being abolished under socialism? Well, I actually can read to you the section of the Communist Manifesto that point of confusion is in, because it is actually in the new CPI educational manual, We Are City Builders. That section from the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, that is the basis of people making that allegation, just so happens to be in We Are City Builders. On page 141 of We Are City Builders, Proletarians and Communists, Karl Marx, 1848. So I will read you what Karl Marx actually said on that question. Let's just, all right. Okay. All right. He said, abolish the family. Even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. It is in its completely developed form, the family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its completement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanquishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty. But you say we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education, is it not also social and determined by social conditions under which you educate by the invention of direct or indirect of society by means of the schools? The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the class character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlations of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting the more, by the action of modern industry, all of the family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists want to introduce a community of women, scream the bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees his wife as a mere instrument of production. He hears the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that lot of being in common all likewise fall to the women. He has not even a suspicion at this point is aimed to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of the bourgeoisie at the community of women, which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce a community of women. It has existed from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having their wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of the common prostitutes, take great pleasure in seducing each other's wives. Bourgeois marriage is, in reality, a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with it the abolition of the community of women springing from that system of prostitution, both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring to... anyways, that's what is he saying there? Well, he's basically saying that it's been alleged against the communists that they seek to abolish the family. 3 historic figures you would want to meet the most. Give an overview of how Latin American communist movements have combined revolutionary electoral strategy to achieve their goals. All right. Latin America. Electoral revolutionary strategy. 5 historical figures. All righty. So what he's saying there is basically they're accusing the communists of wanting to abolish the family. And he is saying that the capitalists are already abolishing the family with child labor, with dividing people, with reducing family to a mere money relation. And he talks about how women have always had communities among themselves, and that the idea that communists want to create a community of women is nonsense, about how the capitalists view sex in a predatory way, and view women as commodities. He's comparing capitalism to prostitution, and if you read The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, which is an important text by Frederick Engels, Marxism teaches that the family as an institution has evolved and changed based on the economic forms of society. During hunter-gatherer civilization, when humans lived in tribes of 20 or 30 people, there was no real set family. Okay, there was what you could call the whole tribe was basically a family. People were couples, kind of, but the whole tribe was a family. They didn't even really keep track of whose kid was whose kid, right? It was just that was how it was. With the origin of private property, you suddenly had the family created, and that was a man and his wives and his children and his property, right? And you kept track of whose kid was whose kid. So when someone died, it was determined who got their property. And that the family has changed over the course of society. As the economic base changes, the family changes. The nature of the family changes, right? You know, it's very funny, but, many times when I was growing up, I would see a bumper sticker. I would see a bumper sticker by evangelicals, Christians who were opposed to gay marriage. The bumper sticker would say, marriage equals one man plus one woman, and then it would have a Bible verse below it. And I would talk to these people and I would say, it's funny. How many wives did Abraham have? How many wives did Elijah have? How many wives? And you start going through the Old Testament, it's very clear that, the Old Testament, the Bible, does not say marriage is one man plus one woman. It's one man plus hundreds of women, right? I mean, how many wives did King Solomon have, right? That the institution of marriage has changed, and the family has changed along with the economic base, right? That institutions in society change. There is no sacred way the family must be. That in hunter-gatherer civilization, the family was one way. Under feudalism, the family was another way. And under modern capitalism, the family is another way, right? That these institutions change. And as we move toward a more egalitarian society, naturally, as the economic base changes, the nature of institutions like the family will also change. That's all Marxism says. And he's making fun of this allegation. You want to create a community of women because women have always had communities. Women have always been around. And there you go. That's from the Communist Manifesto, what I just read there. And that, unfortunately, a lot of what you can call the synthetic left, the academic left, they kind of take the economics out of everything I just said. And they start arguing, well, the family is an oppressive institution. If you get married, you're prolonging a patriarchal system or something like that. And they miss the whole point of what Marx said about the family, what Frederick Engels said about the family and the origin of the family, private property, and the state, which is that these institutions change based on the economic base, right? Right? When we move towards socialism, inevitably the nature of the family will change as we move towards socialism. As we move toward communism, the nature of the family will change. Global warming. That these things change based on the nature of society. And that's it. And what the synthetic left do is that they take economics out of Marxism and make it a cultural movement. And when they do that, they don't, they miss everything. And a lot of working class people, the family is very important, right? And I would never want to take someone's family away from them. I'm married. I don't have children. But, I think that family is very important. And, it is capitalism that is destroying the family right now. Right? It is capitalism that is destroying the family. It's capitalism that is, look, most marriages and most divorces are due to money disagreements. People are working and it drives people apart. You talk about, the alienation between parents and their children. It's capitalism that's destroying the family. It's not socialism. It's not like a bunch of socialists are going around and saying, stop having a family. No, it's capitalism. It is largely our modern capitalist society that drives people away from each other, that alienates people and takes away those bonds. Socialism is about reestablishing those bonds, but not simply within the family, but within all of society. It's about creating a society where people are no longer alienated from each other. I actually made a video on this question, like a very short video, like what is the actual Marxist view of the family? It was from a stream I did with Ewoks Unhinged, so check that out. And as far as polyamory, look, my personal view is that these things are individual questions. I don't want to tell anyone how to live their sex life, right? It's not my business. Not my business, right? If you want to be polyamorous, you can be polyamorous. If you want to be monogamous, you can be monogamous. I don't believe that we as a society should be, telling people what they do in that area of their life, right? That I'm sorry, but we as a society, we abandoned that a long time ago. Okay. Look, we've got gay marriage, and if people want to be polyamorous, that's fine. Now, obviously, what like the fundamentalist Mormons do out in Utah, where, it's like one man is marrying like 14, 12-year-olds who are underage, that's not okay because they're underage and because it's like a patriarchal thing where these young women don't have much of a choice. Obviously, you can't be having that, right? But, if consenting adults want to enter a relationship in which they're treated as adults and as equals and not as slaves, and they want to, be together, and it's more than two of them, I mean, that's not my business, right? And I don't want to wage culture wars. I'm tired of culture wars. And I believe there needs to be a consensus, right? There needs to be not a consensus, there needs to be an understanding. Look, if you want to have a very conservative church where you practice conservative social conservatism and you teach your children that homosexuality is wrong and all the women cover their heads, you can do that. But people who don't want to live that way, they can do that, right? That there needs to be a mutual respect. Muslims can live their lives as Muslims. Conservative Christians can live their lives as conservative Christians. Orthodox Jews can live their lives as Orthodox Jews. But wild socially liberal people can live their lives as wild socially liberal people. We won't stop you from doing what you want to do. You don't stop us from doing what we want to do. That's the understanding that there needs to be, right? If there was some kind of way we could come to some society-wide consensus, we don't have that. The United States is not a nation, right? We don't have a national religion. We don't have a national culture. We don't have a national identity. We don't even have a national language, okay? We don't have a common culture. We don't have a common... So imposing some kind of social model, like saying this is the way we're going to do things in America, you can't do that. You really can't do that. We have never been a nation. So, it might make sense for some country that is more culturally homogeneous to start, setting rules about these kind of things. But in the United States, we are a nation of settlers. And we don't have the ability. If we started making rules around these kind of things, we would never be able to agree on them because there's no common culture here. There's no common identity here. There is nothing that holds the United States together. Notions of what the family should be are very different all throughout the United States. Notions of, look, there's nothing, it's like you can't, it's one thing if you have a country that has rules and you're keeping those rules intact. We in the United States have never been culturally homogeneous. Ever. Ever. So there you go. Okay. Sorrel. Alrighty. So there you go. Okay. China's Belt and Road Initiative and drug cartels in Latin America. Well, look, I think that if people in Latin America, in countries like Guatemala and Honduras, which are a mess of drug cartels, look at them. And again, let's back up, right? Capitalism is supposed to be making life better for people. Socialism is supposed to make everyone poor. Nicaragua is a socialist country. Honduras and Guatemala are capitalist countries, and they're all right next to each other, right? In Honduras, they had a socialist president. He was ousted, and they've had a free market regime, and people there are dirt poor. Guatemala, 1953, Jacobo Arbenz was a progressive and a socialist. He was ousted. They had Rios Montt, the military dictator. They've had free market policies there. They're dirt poor, drug gangs everywhere. Nicaragua, on the other hand, socialist society, raising people out of poverty, higher living standards, better conditions. They have problems there, but it's far better. So if you look at it, Nicaragua is doing far better. But look, if we were to carry out China's vision of win-win cooperation, if the United States and China were to team up and start building hospitals and schools across Latin America, highways and high-speed railway, and people had real economic opportunities, they would be far less likely to join a drug gang. right? I mean, think about it, right? I mean, your choice. Have a decent, normal job where you don't risk being killed, you can make decent money for your family, or do something very dangerous and illegal. Most people are going to choose to do the safe, healthy thing where they can make normal money. The answer to drugs, the answer to terrorism is economic development. When people have jobs, when people have economic opportunities, they don't join criminal organizations, they don't join terrorist groups. This is pretty basic, right? So yes, if economic development were happening in places not just in Central America, but in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, Iraq, Libya, if economic development was happening in these countries that are suffering right now, then it's very likely that the drug gangs and the terrorists would be weakened very, very significantly. Right? You don't defeat terrorism with bombs. You defeat terrorism with jobs. You don't defeat terrorism with drones. You defeat terrorism with jobs. You defeat terrorism with highways. You defeat terrorism with high-speed railways. You defeat terrorism with hospitals and education and schools and economic development. The way to save humanity from the horrors of poverty, created by poverty, is development. Right? And that's why the synthetic left that does not believe in economic development and actively argues that economic growth is bad and that we need to roll back human development is so dangerous. And when they go around the developing world and try to stop China from building coal power plants in Africa because it pollutes too much, when they try to force countries in the developing world that have never had electricity to sign treaties that say they can't have it, because this is dangerous, right? And when they redefine imperialism and shift the conversation about imperialism away from economics and make imperialism about culture, right? When they say that imperialism isn't keeping the world poor so Wall Street can stay rich, it's people in Saudi Arabia watching American movies, not beautiful Middle Eastern art. When they make it a cultural conversation, right, and they shift the conversation away from development, they're completely missing the point. They're completely missing the point that imperialism is about holding back growth and holding back economic development, keeping spheres of influence for the imperialists, keeping corners of the world underdeveloped and impoverished. That's what imperialism is. And of course, when countries are unstable, you're going to have a rise in terrorist groups and drug gangs and all kinds of instability. All right. What do I think of Trotsky's Should America Go Communist? I've read it. It's been a long time since I've read it. He wrote it for some magazine. I think they paid him to write it for a magazine in the 1930s. And, it was just kind of basic, about, the American working class could fight for their rights. It would be a unique kind of socialism. It wouldn't be like the Soviet Union because the USA is already developed. I agree with most of it. I'm not a huge fan of Trotsky, but on a topic like that, imagining what the United States would look like in a future communist society, I can't imagine. I disagree with very much of it. I'm trying to remember what he said in it. It's a short little essay, and I don't think it's so bad. It's fine. Alrighty. Freud and Frankenstein. I've not heard that interpretation of the Frankenstein novel. I will say, I have a positive interpretation of Frankenstein, right? The standard Marxist interpretation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it was written the same year Karl Marx was born, I believe. The standard Marxist interpretation is that it's an attack on human progress and technology. That, that this guy tries to play God, and the result is a monster, and you should never do that. Actually, I see it as a critique of the Industrial Revolution, right? That basically what was happening, you have this scientist who's doing something that has never been done with electricity. He makes a man, but he never provides love for this creature. This creature is just kind of created and abandoned. And it's about how when you become obsessed with technological progress, but forget humanity, and do it in a self-serving, greedy way, people, and you lose compassion and kindness, the result is real horrors. And as the capitalists were developing electric lights and railroads and all the Industrial Revolution technology, they created real horrors, not monsters, but, sweatshops. Real horrors. The Industrial Revolution was a horrific time. And that's what the book is about. King Key agrees with me. I agree, Caleb, the coldness of tech. And it's a progressive critique. It's basically saying, look, we're advancing technologically, but we have forgotten to care for people. We've forgotten how important compassion and kindness is. That's what I see it as. I don't see it. I don't see the Freudian thing there. I'll have to look that analysis up. I've not heard that one. How do you choose what you want to do with your life? Well, I think you should start out by asking yourself, what do you like to do, number one, but also what are your skills? What do you have real skills at? And if there's something you like to do, if there's something you're very interested in, but if there's also something you're very successful at, try to see if there's a place that things you're good at and things that you are successful at kind of combine, something you like to do and you're good at. I think that's a good place to start. And how do you find your purpose or calling in life? Well, again, I think that's a journey, a question you have to wrangle with. The main thing is finding a community that you feel comfortable with and you feel safe with. All right. What do I think of Malcolm X? Oh, thank you, Andre. I have a very high opinion of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was a person who very much loved his people. He was a fighter for the rights of African Americans. He saw that his people were suffering. He went to prison himself, and he went from being a criminal and someone who was in prison to coming out of prison and becoming a leader of the Nation of Islam, a black nationalist, an anti-imperialist. You read some of his speeches. He was a Muslim, but he admired Mao Zedong. He admired Ho Chi Minh. He admired the black liberation movements around the world. He admired communists. He was critical of capitalism. I have a very high opinion of Malcolm X. Yeah, I think he was a great individual. I also have a high opinion of Dr. Martin Luther King, but many people have pointed out you could not have had Dr. Martin Luther King without Malcolm X. That the reason a lot of the establishment was willing to tolerate Dr. Martin Luther King was because Malcolm X was also there, and Malcolm X was much more radical. Now, what's important to point out is a lot of people like to contrast the two, right? And that's like the X-Men, right? The X-Men movies, they say that like Dr. Xavier is like Dr. Martin Luther King for the mutants, and Magneto is like Malcolm X, and it's like people like to play this game. Malcolm X bad, Martin Luther King good. But, at the end of the day, there's a really big difference between Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. A difference of geography, right? Malcolm X, in the 1950s, when he came into prominence, he ultimately died in the mid-60s, but when he came into prominence in the 50s, when the Nation of Islam was expanding and becoming a big organization among African Americans in the 1950s, it was not in the South. The Nation of Islam started in Detroit, and it was a movement of urban African Americans in northern industrial cities. New York City, it was in Harlem, it was in Detroit, it was in Chicago, it was in Pittsburgh. The Nation of Islam was among African Americans who lived in the North, who could vote, but were ghettoized, were forced to live in certain neighborhoods, faced discrimination, and had a very different set of grievances, but also a very different level of, it was a very different life. Life in the North and life in the Jim Crow South were very different, okay? I'm not saying that one was better than the other, or I'm just saying there were pretty big differences. Malcolm X constantly, raised the right of self-defense, and was, kind of pushing kind of militancy. Martin Luther King, on the other hand, was emphasizing nonviolence, the need for nonviolence. Now, again, different conditions, different situations. Dr. Martin Luther King became to prominence leading the Montgomery bus boycott for the right, to not be forced to sit in the back of the bus, right? For basic civil rights, for voting rights. Whereas in the North, it was about community empowerment. It was about economic demands. It was about police brutality. And so, the two movements had a different character. The movement for civil rights, for basic civil rights against apartheid, and the movement for economic empowerment and nationalism of the black community, I mean, they're different movements. Now, Martin Luther King later went north, and did eventually, get involved in community struggles in Cicero, Chicago, etc. And you also had, black nationalists like Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, who got involved in the South, pushing for Black Power, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, etc. Difference is class two. Malcolm was working class, whereas Dr. Martin Luther King was middle class. I'm not sure I agree with that, actually, Red Illuminati. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. Eugenics the same as social Darwinism. Okay. Same as social Darwinism. Alrighty. Okay. All right. Andrew Cuomo. Look, never been a fan of his. I think he's been an awful governor. He's like the symbol of the Democratic Party machine of New York City. He's corrupt. He's, he's everything that everyone in New York City complains about all the time. He's got his hands all over it. Look, and it's a little interesting, the timing of all of this. Like, where was all of this during Me Too? Remember when every politician in the world was stepping down and half of Hollywood was being exposed in Me Too? So where was he during all that? It's a little weird. And do you remember the beginning of the pandemic when he was portrayed as a saint? And it's a little strange, the timing of all of this, but I do not like Andrew Cuomo. I think he's not a good governor. I'm not a big fan of his, so, if he were to step down, I would not complain about it at all. All righty. Is the Pope synthetic left? Yeah, pretty much, I would say. I mean, the Pope is not calling for public control of the means of production. The Pope rejects Marxism, but the Pope is also emphasizing, the need for, a more compassionate and kinder society. He's critical of a lot of the free market policies. He's very pro-migrant. So, I can see what you're getting at there. I think largely a lot of what the Pope is doing is related to the fact that that the United States and Europe are at odds. Donald Trump, very much gave the middle finger to Europe, and the Catholic Church in general. The politics of the Catholic Church. I wrote an essay about this. It's in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, about the shifting political line of the Vatican. The Vatican tends to follow, the European mainland. What the Italian capitalists and the German capitalists and the French capitalists are doing is what the Pope does, right? The Vatican is with them. Now, sometimes the main, Western European powers are friendly to Britain and the United States and aligned with them, and sometimes they are at odds. In the 1950s, the Catholic Church was in an anti-communist frenzy, and they were all for McCarthyism, and the U.S. government and the Pope got along great, and they were all for, and the Catholic trade unions in the United States helped engage McCarthyism, and they were doing great. In the 60s, you had Vatican II, and as France and Germany were starting to oppose the Vietnam War, the Catholic Church was also starting to oppose the Vietnam War. In the 80s, you had the whole Nicaragua situation, where Europe, Germany, France, countries like that, were friendly to the Sandinistas, were, not as hostile to Cuba. The United States was in an was very much funding the Contras. So in Latin America, you had the United States arming Pentecostals and evangelical fundamentalists to fight the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church was basically kind of backed into an alliance in some cases with Marxists because the United States was aligning itself with evangelicals who were very anti-Catholic. Right? This is all complicated, right? And that, then in the 90s, you'll notice after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Catholic Church and the United States seem to be getting along just fine. So, there are contradictions here. The Pope's left-wing turn, right, recently, I think it is related to a couple things. Firstly, it's related to the fact that there has been this divide, that Donald Trump has dissed Europe. I mean, the fact that Mike Pompeo was blown off, the Pope wouldn't even meet with him. This is about European capital and, the EU countries and the United States not getting along, and the Pope is with the EU countries. It's also related to the fact that that for the first time in history, the majority of Catholics in the world are not white. Okay? That's just a fact. The majority of Catholics in the world, for the first time in history, are not white. And in the European mainland and in the United States, And in the developing world, the Catholic Church is losing influence. But it is more powerful than ever in Latin America. It's more powerful than ever in Asia and in Africa and places like that. And so naturally, the Catholic Church, because it is no longer, it is dominated by white people, but it is no longer a white institution by any means. It is obviously going to have to change its stance, and it can no longer be a defender of racism and colonialism. It's got to look very, very sensitive, and issues like poverty are going to be more important, and that because the Catholic Church at this point has more power in the developing world than it does in the first world, even though it is a first world institution, and that's going to change the nature of the institution, and that at the end of the day, it used to be the Catholic Church very much tried to align itself with social conservatives and folks in the Western world, right? And that's true, that, people who go to church in the United States, Germany and France and Spain and like that tend to be more conservative. So the Catholic Church kind of appealed to those folks. But now, as the Catholic Church is losing influence in the West, where it appealed to conservatives, now the Catholic Church is going to change its messaging style and try to appeal to people in the developing world. I think it's interesting that the Catholic Church is more friendly to China. That's very interesting, especially because the United States is growing more hostile to China. But the European powers are, the Catholic Church is an evolving and changing institution. Another thing that's important you have to remember, and this is true not just of the Catholic Church, but it's true of the Church of Scientology. It's true of any illiberal institution, okay? Any institution that is illiberal. When they get attacked, it kind of forces them into a more progressive stance, right? I mean, the Church of Scientology is awful, okay? I'm not a supporter of Scientology at all. But, when they got attacked, they have been attacked in American media. You cannot deny. The A&E and Leah Remini and like the Church of Scientology, they used to have a huge amount of power in Hollywood, and they got attacked, right? And now they are a pariah in the United States. The media is against them. Everyone's against them. It used to be you couldn't criticize them. They had this ability to silence any critics of them. Not anymore. Now they're under attack. You notice after they got attacked, they entered an alliance with the Nation of Islam. They're very friendly, and they have this alliance with Minister Farrakhan right now. You'll also notice that Tom Cruise made that movie, American Made, which was exposing the CIA drug connection and the Contra War. It was basically a pro-Sandinista movie that Tom Cruise made. Why? Because they're under attack. Right? Illiberal institutions, when they get attacked, that kind of forces them to become more progressive. And that the labor movement, great example. The labor unions of the United States are an illiberal institution. Their interests are contrary to the liberal social order. And you'll notice that labor unions, as they're more and more weakened and attacked, they've started to talk more and more radical. And they endorsed Bernie Sanders this time against the rest of the Democrats. And they, it's not translating into real concrete labor activism, but you'll notice that in the last decade, because labor unions have been so attacked in the United States, the rhetoric that you hear from labor unions has gotten more and more radical. And the same goes for the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, they have been exposed. I mean, the scandals that they have been, subjected to. I mean, every evil pedophile priest, child molesting, child abuse. They've been attacked. Because they've been attacked, they've been forced to start taking a more progressive stand and, emphasizing their criticism of capitalism and kindness to migrants and, being a little more friendly to the gay community and things like that. This is what happens. So if you want an illiberal institution, whatever it is, the Church of Scientology, labor unions, the Vatican, if you want them to start sounding more progressive, all you have to do is have the liberal order of Western capitalism attack them. And as the liberal order attacks them, they will start to say things that are more progressive, more anti-imperialist, that's just how these things work. When illiberal institutions are attacked, they tend to, in pushing back against the attack, become more progressive. It's like a way of defending themselves, right? When the liberal order comes after you, you suddenly are forced to confront the liberal order. And when you're confronting the liberal order, you start to say truth. It's even true for Trump. As bad as Trump was, I'll never forget this. Trump was an awful person, nothing progressive. But you'll notice when Trump got attacked, sometimes that's when Trump would say very true things. When Donald Trump was being yelled at by Bill O'Reilly, remember this? Bill O'Reilly, the Super Bowl interview or whatever, during the Super Bowl, Donald Trump is being interviewed by Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly says, how can you be friendly to Putin? He kills journalists. What did Donald Trump shoot back with? He said, do you think this country's so innocent? Boom. Wow. That was, again, no other president in U.S. history has said that. Do you think Donald Trump would have said that if he hadn't been yelled at? They're saying, oh, you're friendly to Putin. Putin kills journalists. And he says, yeah, you think this country's so innocent? Boom. Right? Donald Trump, when he was getting attacked, he would speak the truth. Right? And that's generally how things work. When institutions are under attack by the liberal order, they start saying true things. That doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think the Church of Scientology is good, but they were under attack, and they remain under attack. So, because they're under attack, they were forced to talk about the CIA drug connection, make an alliance with Minister Farrakhan. That's how these things work, right? The labor unions, labor bureaucracy, very self-serving, sold out the workers in many cases, but, they continue to get attacked, so now they're supporting Bernie Sanders and, Fight for 15, and they're under attack, and the same for the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is under attack in many parts of the world, and so they're forced, when the liberal order fights you, eventually you're going to have to fight the liberal order, and that's how these things work. And that's generally when the liberal order fights you, you generally are forced to fight the liberal order and to make alliances with other illiberal entities. And look, the Catholic Church is under attack. They get friendlier to China. This is how these things work, right? And so when illiberal institutions are attacked, they fight the liberal order and they establish ties with other illiberal institutions. That's my analysis of the Pope. All right. Antifa, FBI informants. I'm sure Antifa is full of FBI informants. I'm sure Proud Boys are full of FBI informants. I'm sure all kinds of radical groups are full of FBI informants. I don't know what the point of that is. Okay. All right. Howard Taft, right? If an anti-monopoly government leads to socialism, how is Howard Taft not creating socialism because he broke up big monopolies? Well, when we say monopolies, we mean something a little bit different than what is meant in standard economics. Standard economics, monopoly means there's only one company, right? There's only one car company that's a monopoly. Well, no. We argue that capitalism is in its monopolistic stage when there's only like 4 or 5 car companies, right? That monopolism when we talk about it, we're not referring to a pure 100% monopoly. We're referring to one giant corporation. Look, there was a whole thing, Howard Taft, and not just Howard Taft, but, Teddy Roosevelt and others breaking up the trusts and such. And partially that was done in order to try and stabilize capitalism in the interest of capitalism. But that's different. When we talk about a government that is an anti-monopoly government, we mean a government that is fighting and waging a popular fight to protect the working class, to rebuild the country, to use state power to protect working families against the monopolies. We're not referring to simply antitrust legislation. Antitrust legislation is something that many capitalists believe in, right? Many capitalists, are the first people. Who built the Federal Reserve? I know it was communists, right? You read The Creature from Jekyll Island. Ooh, they're all communists. J.P. Morgan was not a communist, all right? Right? J.P. Morgan and the capitalists created the Federal Reserve to stabilize their own system. Trusts lead to monopolistic stagnation. Thank you, Mona. I appreciate it. I'm glad you like the work I'm doing. Thank you. Trusts lead to monopolistic stagnation, right? You can't have a stable capitalist economy if there are, pure 100% monopolies, right? Because it doesn't work, right? And then often capitalists, especially the more wealthy capitalists, have a managerial attitude, and they will want to have things like antitrust laws in order to keep things going. All right. Latin America, electoral and revolutionary strategy. Well, look, if you want to understand Bolivarianism, and I've said this many times, right? You have to understand that there was a big tactical shift, a very, very big tactical shift in how communists operated from the 80s to the 90s. In the 1970s and 80s, communists in Latin America focused on guerrilla warfare. Right? All throughout Latin America, communists went into the countryside and waged guerrilla warfare. And who were they waging guerrilla warfare against? They were waging guerrilla warfare against military juntas, right? Venezuela, Chile, Bolivia, all these countries had military regimes and, military dictatorships. And, if you believed in socialism in the cities, you would get rounded up and disappeared. And college students were often arrested for protesting, etc. And so what communists did is they used, the strategy of Che Guevara. They went into the countryside and they carved out liberated territory. And in a couple countries it worked, right? In Nicaragua, it worked. But in most of Latin America, it didn't exactly work. But then when the Soviet Union fell, there were big shifts, right? There were big shifts. In a lot of these countries, you could have free elections again. And communists could openly participate in the political process. Pinochet was forced out of office, right? And a lot of these countries that hadn't been open before started being more open. And so in Cuba, they had very big conferences where the Cuban communists worked with communists from all over the world to change the strategy. And instead of building guerrilla warfare operations, the communists of Latin America switched their strategy to building anti-neoliberalism coalitions, right? And in Venezuela and in Bolivia and in all over Latin America, communists started building coalitions against neoliberalism and neoliberal cutbacks. Long before anybody was talking about neoliberalism in the United States, the Cubans were talking about neoliberalism. You can read books that the Cuban government published in the 90s where Fidel Castro was saying neoliberalism is the enemy, neoliberalism. Long before Naomi Klein published her shock doctrine, long before anyone was talking about neoliberalism, Cuba was talking about neoliberalism and orienting in Latin America, orienting their allies in the communist movement of Latin America to fight neoliberalism. And in Venezuela and in Bolivia and a lot of these places, the way Hugo Chavez got elected, the way Evo Morales elected, the way Rafael Correa got elected, the way these people got elected is there was a mass movement of anti-neoliberal organizations, groups that fought against neoliberalism and cutbacks were created, and like a popular front against neoliberalism. And all the elections that led to the election of Bolivarian leaders, basically, they weren't voting for socialism or capitalism. It was a referendum on neoliberalism. Chavez, when he first got elected, said he didn't believe in socialism or capitalism. He was for whatever is the best for Venezuela, and that the international banks, the International Monetary Fund, was destroying the lives of the Venezuelans, and that he was a patriotic Bolivarian Venezuelan, and he was going to fight for Venezuela. And the election was very much a referendum. Are you for neoliberal cutbacks, or are you against them? And that's how Chavez won. And that it was that strategy of shifting from a strategy of waging guerrilla warfare to a strategy of building a popular front. But it was a popular front against imperialism, right? It wasn't, they didn't just label, some of the capitalists of Venezuela fascists and defend the bourgeoisie from them. They built a popular front against neoliberalism. Thank you, Amanda. I'm glad you like what I have to say. That's basically, it was a popular front strategy against neoliberalism. It was, are you for the cuts? Are you for the privatizations being pushed by the United States and the International Monetary Forum? Or are you against them? They polarized the country, and that was the strategy. And it worked, right? And I wrote an article when Cuba was taken off the state sponsor of terrorism list. Trump put them back on it. But when they were taken off of it, I said, look, Cuba hasn't changed. Cuba hasn't changed. The world has changed. Yes, in the 70s and 80s, Cuba was promoting guerrilla warfare. Why? Because these countries had military dictatorships, and they had no choice, right? People had to take up arms, but now people have the ability to organize peacefully. Communists don't prefer violence. Communists don't prefer terrorism, violence, stuff like that. Right? We're not bomb throwers. We're not advocates of violence. Communists would prefer a peaceful transition to socialism. All right, City of God. We would prefer a peaceful transition to socialism. And now that is possible in Latin America. Through the Popular Front strategy in Venezuela, Bolivia, and other places, they've been able to have a peaceful transition to socialism. Now, obviously, things have gotten pretty violent since then, but they were able to come to power peacefully. And there you go. Now, that obviously they had to change the nature of the state. Obviously, they had to obviously they had to change the nature of a lot of things, new constitutions, new police forces, training their military in Cuba, etc. But they came to power peacefully, and that is possible, right? And that is what they would prefer to do, right? And that violent revolutions only happen when the peaceful road is no longer available. All right, 5 historical figures that I'd like to meet: William Z. Foster, Huey Long, Julius Caesar, Mao Zedong. That's 4. Or no, it's 3. Or is that 4? Yeah, it's 4. Mao Zedong, Julius Caesar, William Z. Foster, Huey Long. Who else? Kwame Nkrumah. How's that? All right, there you go. All right. Will global warming lead to revolution? No. In fact, this is a common misconception, okay? People often have it in their head that if things get bad, we'll have socialism. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. If things get bad, that in and of itself does not lead to things getting better, right? There's an expression, people say, well, it has to get worse before it gets better. Before it can get better, it has to get worse. That's true to some extent. But if things get worse and there are no people's movements and there are no institutions that are capable of making things, making and leading people's resistance and winning real victories, then things just get worse and it's demoralizing. If things get worse and then people are inspired to fight back against that and they build institutions of resistance that start winning great victories, then things can get better. But if things just get worse, they just get worse. And that's it. And that's what people don't get. And that's the problem with what people refer to as accelerationism, right? People who say, oh no, we want, privatizations. We want the capitalists to make things so bad so that then people have a revolution. No, they don't. Revolutions are not made by hostile conditions alone. Revolutions are made, in order to have a revolution, you need 3 things. Number 1, you need a serious crisis in society. And it has to be a crisis that is so big that unrest has spread not just among the working class, but among the capitalists themselves. Even among the ruling class, there is a crisis, number 1. Number 2, you need there to be serious rebellions among the people. And the people need to be in motion, fighting back and demanding their rights amid this crisis. And number 3, you need a revolutionary organization that is capable of transforming those fights and rebellions among the people and utilizing the crisis among the ruling class to create a new society. And until you have those 3 things, you're not having a revolution. Can climate change create a serious crisis in society? Yes. Can climate change create rebellions among the people? Not necessarily. It's pretty hard. What are you going to do? Throw bricks at a hurricane? Not going to work. Okay? There may be food riots but and then on top of that, you need a revolutionary organization that is capable of transforming those things into a revolution. That is how you have a revolution, right? Every socialist revolution that has ever happened, the way it has happened is you've had a serious crisis in society, not just among the working class, but among the capitalists themselves, number 1. Number 2, you've had mass rebellions among the people. And number 3, you've had a revolutionary organization, revolutionary institutions, political infrastructure to transform those things into creating the new society. And global warming in and of itself does not create, it creates maybe a serious crisis in society. That's about it. All righty. The influence of George Sorel on Lenin, Hitler, and Mussolini. George Sorel had 0 influence on Lenin, as far as I can tell. Lenin and Sorel spoke a completely different language. While some of their conclusions, in a vague way, were similar to each other. Sorel advocates this group of heroic men that engage in violence. Lenin is advocating a party of new type, a vanguard party. it's justified in completely different language. They have completely different, Sorel is into this mysticism and the power of mythology and all of this. Lenin is scientific Marxism. He's talking about the economics of imperialism. So Lenin and Sorel, I have never seen any evidence that they collaborated or talked to each other or had any influence on each other whatsoever. Sorel, however, was, at the time of his death, George Sorel very much admired Lenin. And he argued that Lenin's vanguard party, Party of a New Type, proved he was right. So Sorel looked at Lenin and said, oh, see, there's a guy who did something kind of like what I said, and he took power. That proves I was right. So the relationship between Sorel and Lenin is very, very distant. There are some similar conclusions about the types of revolutionary organizations. That's it, okay? That's really it. Sorel and Lenin. Sorel is a first world guy. Lenin is, fighting for Russia, which is not part of the Western capitalist system. It's, kept in poverty because of it. Lenin speaks in scientific Marxist terms. Sorel abandons scientific Marxism and does this whole spiritual power of myth thing. Lenin is in favor of a political struggle. Sorel rejects politics as a syndicalist. So they're very, very distant from each other. Mussolini, on the other hand, Mussolini is very much inspired by Sorel. And in fact, Mussolini was a student of George Sorel. Mussolini was in the Italian Socialist Party. And if you read his autobiography, Mussolini was in the Italian Socialist Party, and I've read Mussolini's autobiography, and in it he says that he didn't like the Italian Socialist Party because they weren't violent enough. They weren't violent enough. That's his critique. They weren't bloodthirsty enough. They didn't believe in violence and killing. So Mussolini broke away from the Italian Socialist Party, and he supported World War I, right? A lot of Italian socialists and communists protested World War I. Mussolini supported World War I. He supported it on the grounds that if the Germans were able to overthrow and conquer France, they would overturn the Great French Revolution. And Mussolini said, well, the French Revolution was so great and progressive, we've got to support World War I to defend France and defend the legacy of the French Revolution. So Mussolini formed, his organization. For a while, they called themselves National Syndicalists, right? And syndicalism was the ideology of Sorel. And Mussolini was a student of George Sorel. And eventually, he changed the name of his organization from being National Syndicalists to being fascisti. And they took the symbol of the ancient Romans, which also comes out of Sorel. Sorel was all about the power of myth and ancient Rome, etc. So George Sorel was very much an influence on Mussolini, and the fascisti were very much this group of violence. That's what Sorel said. He said that the problem with Marxism is Marxism wants to build mass organizations in communities, and instead we need isolated groups of violent men who engage in acts of violence and become, quote-unquote, heroic. I love your lives. I've learned more from them than any poli-sci class ever. I'm glad you're learning. Great. And so Mussolini, definitely an influence of Sorel. I don't know about Sorel and Hitler. I mean, you have to remember, so Hitler was never a syndicalist. And actually there are some early pamphlets by the Nazi Party where they argue that they were not fascists, right? And that fascism was a separate movement. And so I don't know about Sorel and Hitler. Lenin and Sorel, there is like a vague similarity in what they were saying, vaguely similar things, but they completely different worldviews, completely different ideologies, etc. Mussolini and Sorel are very close. George Sorel and Mussolini are very, very close. And Hitler and Sorel, I really don't know. I mean, if anything, Hitler was probably influenced by Mussolini, and Mussolini was influenced by Sorel. But Hitler was never on the left, right? Mussolini came out of the left, right? He was a leftist who eventually supported World War I and became a Sorelian, and then became, started his fascist movement. Whereas Hitler was never a leftist, right? Hitler, he fought in World War I. He came back from World War I, and he was a pan-Germanist for a while, and he was never on the left. Hitler was never on the left. Okay. All right. Are eugenics and social Darwinism the same thing? Not exactly. One feeds into the other, but they're not exactly the same. Social Darwinism Social Darwinism is the belief that that it's an interpretation of Darwin's theories of evolution that justifies some people, some people being, treated better than other people, and opposes any effort to engage in social reform. Social Darwinism basically argues that you shouldn't, have social programs for low-income people. You shouldn't give low-income people health care, because then they'll breed and then they'll have children who are also low income, right? And that it's good when people die of starvation. It's good when poor people aren't able to reproduce because they're genetically inferior, and that it's the argument that all the evil things about capitalism are actually good because they're purifying our gene pool. That's what social Darwinism is. It's very evil, and it's the British promoted it. Eugenics, on the other hand, is the direct attempts to breed people, right? So social Darwinism is just a statement of justifying these things. Not exactly. He was in the Painters Union, Jared, but he was not exactly. Social Darwinism is just trying to justify bad things that already happen in capitalist society in the name of, well, survival of the fittest. Eugenics is when you're actively trying to breed people, sterilize people, etc. There's a difference, right? Social Darwinism is just an analysis, right? Eugenics is an active attempt to try and breed people like animals. Okay, and there's a difference, but obviously they're very closely related, right? If you view, the way people are in the world as a result of their genetic inferiority or superiority, survival of the fittest, natural selection, if you view human society in that context, and the next stage is obviously to actively take control of those things. And I view social Darwinism as deeply evil. I view eugenics as deeply evil. Both of those are deeply, deeply evil. So I reject both of those. And both of those are staples of neoliberalism and staples of the British Empire and of Adam Smith free market economics. That was social Darwinist rhetoric, was the justification for all of the... This drives me crazy. You want to know something that drives me crazy, folks? Whenever people are trying to get you to hate socialism or Marxism, they always give you this number. Communism killed blah, 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 million people. Socialism killed blah, 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 million people. And nobody talks about all the millions and millions of people who have been killed by free market capitalism. The British in the 1800s went around the world and imposed free market capitalism at the barrel of a gun. And there were famines in India where millions of people died. And there were famines in Ireland where millions of people died. And there were famines in Vietnam where the French killed millions of people. And there was a famine in Iran where millions of people died. And there were famines. All the British Empire, with free trade economics, went around the world committing economic genocide. They forced China to adopt free trade economics at the barrel of a gun. They waged 2 opium wars to force China to open itself up to free trade in the international markets. And the result were routine famines in which millions of people died. The British went to India, and India had been weaving for thousands of years. And when the British went to India, they burned all the looms, and they forced them to import their cloth from Britain. And there were provinces in India where they had famines where like 15 million people died. No one ever talks about this. In Ireland, the land seizures, the Whig Party, right? You talk about the potato famine in Ireland. What was going on there? There were laissez-faire policies from the Whig Party, that imposed free market policies and land seizures and absentee landlordism in Ireland. And as a result, when the potato crops failed, millions of Irish people starved to death because of free market policies. Nobody ever talks about this, right? They're all over the world. Adam Smith, free market, free trade economics has killed millions of people. And nobody talks about this, right? And what was happening when the Irish people were being starved to death by the British Empire? what did they say? They said, oh, this is just natural, right? This is natural selection. The Irish are genetically inferior to us English people, and this is just natural selection. When the people of India were starving in mass, Winston Churchill laughed about it, and he said, oh, it's the fault of the Indian people. They breed like rabbits, right? I mean, this is all over the world this was happening. In China, they said, oh, the Chinese people are savages. They're just inferior. That's why they're dying in mass. And with social Darwinist rhetoric, free trade, capitalist economics killed millions of people in country after country after country. In Iran, in India, in China, in African countries. British settlers, the settlers in British colonies in Africa, sometimes they would go to villages and they would think, we want this place. And so they would take these primitive machine guns and they would just gun down the entire village and just kill the entire village. Rhodesia, right? Rhodesia, they call it, right? Well, that's what's now Zimbabwe. Well, it was named after Cecil Rhodes, the colonizer, right? And in Rhodesia, the settler state, the apartheid state the British created in Africa, in southern Africa. It's now Zimbabwe. Again, the British settlers, they would just go to these villages with their machine guns and just destroy the whole place. South Africa, right? The British set up the apartheid state in South Africa. Same thing. Went there, just killed everybody. I mean, and none of this and I argued with this with Stefan Molyneux, the Libertarian. I argued with him about this, right? And they sit there and they play this, oh, communism killed this many million, and it's like free trade. The whole reason that communism emerged as a movement was because everybody knew that capitalism was killing millions and millions and millions of people. That's the whole reason. The whole reason communism emerged as a movement, right? Is because everybody knew. And it wasn't just in the third world. People were being worked to death in sweatshops. For every mile of railroad they built when they were building railroad in the United States, at least one railroad worker died from being worked to death. You talk about the sweatshops and it's just shocking to me that people play this game where it's like, oh, communism killed this many people. There you go. Alrighty. Okay, next question. The City of God by St. Augustine. Well, look, the book The City of God by St. Augustine, it's the foundation of Catholic theology and most Christian theology. And, it's basically written from a defensive standpoint because he's basically trying to explain, a lot of the book is him trying to explain why the Roman Empire collapsed at roughly the same time it was adopting the Christian religion. And that was a bit of a point of defensiveness for Christianity because, the Roman Empire, this big, huge empire, adopted the Christian religion, and then it collapsed, right? And if you're going around the world trying to get people to adopt your religion, and there's this big, huge empire that adopts your religion and then goes kaput, not a big selling point for your religion. It's kind of funny. Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, he had a dream. The official reason that he converted to Christianity is he had a dream. And in the sky, he saw a cross. And then he heard this booming voice say to him, "Under this sign, you shall conquer." And he woke up and he said, clearly, I must convert to Christianity because I just saw this cross and it said, "Under this sign, you shall conquer." And that's kind of hilarious because under that sign, his empire fell apart. There you go. I would disagree with St. Augustine. Ultimately, I would argue that the reason that Christianity played a role in the fall of the Roman Empire, the reason that Rome was collapsing at the same time that it was adopting Christianity, is because the foundations of the Christian faith are not ones that would be used to build an empire, right? Jesus Christ in his teachings was not instructing his disciples about how to go out and build a giant empire. It's not what it's about. Read Jesus' teachings. It is not about trying to build a big, mighty empire. So there you go. And that basically Rome was falling apart. the proletarians were fighting for their rights, the hedonism, the stoicism, and that gradually, as the proletarians were becoming a bigger and bigger class in Rome, and they were fighting for their rights and demanding their rights, and the Romans needed to stabilize society and build things like orphanages. As I said in the opening of the live, they eventually adopted a very, very watered down version of Christianity to stabilize their empire. And it was at a time their empire was falling apart, and they were desperately, desperately trying to hold their empire together. That's my only point about the City of God. There's one interesting anecdote that I think from the City of God, which is that in the City of God by St. Augustine, there's a very famous anecdote about an emperor arresting a pirate, right? And the emperor says to the pirate, he says, "What meanest thou by waging terror on the open seas?" And the pirate replies to the emperor, "What meanest thou by What meanest thou by terrorizing the whole world?" Right? What I do with a mere ship, I'm called a robber, and you do to the world, and thou art labeled emperor. Something like that. I don't remember the exchange exactly. If I were giving a presentation, I would look it up. Many people have pointed that out, that basically, the difference between a pirate and an emperor is simply a matter of size, right? And that in a lot of cases, right, attempts to justify armed force, it's often used as an analogy when criticizing foreign policy. And that's all I'll say about that. But, this has been an interesting live. The conversation has gone a lot of different interesting places tonight. But that's okay. You guys are great. Look, I really value everything I'm able to engage with you all about in this community, right? We talk about many great things. It's been a great conversation here tonight. So, I'm just going to keep doing these lives. I'm glad I can engage with all of you. Shout out to my friend Justin, who's in the chat. I'm glad that you're on there. That's really great, and I hope we can be in touch. And, great stuff. This is a great community. I'm glad I hopped on here. It's late. It's Friday night, but I figured I would hop on here and engage with all of you all. And, it's really a pleasure to be able to engage with all of you and talk about these issues. I'm going to be streaming with Ramiro tomorrow, and I'll be streaming with Infrared on Sunday. I'll be appearing on George Galloway's show on Sunday as well. So it's got a big weekend coming up. So thank you all for tuning in. And I guess we'll end it here, the way we always end. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And on that note, we're out. Thanks, folks.